don't mind him. There is no telling what you might hear. My street that I live on is always active. I hope no insanely loud cars come by, but it very well could happen. Also, I didn't do any landscaping at my house, but every spring, usually I thought these blossom, but they did it this time of year. And I don't remember what they're called. My grandma told me what they're called, and I completely forgot. So if you know, please tell me, because they're really pretty. I need to press it in a book, actually. I keep forgetting to do that. But today, in honor of John Steinbeck, I don't have a cigarette on me, but I love this image of John Steinbeck. I absolutely love that portrait of him. And even though I don't have any cigarettes on me, I do have a pipe with some black cherry tobacco. So I figured that will more than do the trick. So, cheers. So last time, I brought all my books with me. So last time, I reviewed Fidelity by Wendell Berry, and I noticed after reading Cannery Row, I realized that they actually have quite a bit in common, even though they are very, very different stories with very, very different tones to them. Whereas Fidelity is 5 separate short stories with a through line, like the main character kind of being the town. That's kind of exactly what Cannery Row is, because there's no true main character in the book, but the main character is arguably the town, Cannery Row. So even though this isn't a series of short stories, I've heard it called a series of vignettes, because sometimes you'll have a chapter where you're kind of picking up where you left off, and then there's a short vignette that has nothing to do with what you previously read, but it kind of gives you a greater picture of the town as a whole. So I'm going to try to collect my thoughts here and not jump all over the place too much. Every review of this book that I've listened to, it seems to start the same, so I feel like I'm compelled to do this. I have to read the introduction. I don't even think this is chapter, this is the introduction to it, not even chapter 1. Cannery Row in Monterey, California is a poem, a stink, a grating noise, a quality of light, a tone, a habit, a nostalgia, a dream. Cannery Row is the gathered and scattered, tin and iron and rust and splintered wood, chipped pavement and weedy lots and junk heaps, sardine canneries of corrugated iron, honky-tonks, restaurants and whorehouses, and little crowded groceries and laboratories and flop houses. Its inhabitants are, as the man once said, whores, pimps, gamblers, and sons of bitches, by which he meant everybody. Had the man looked through another peephole, he might have said saints, angels, and martyrs, and holy men, and he would have meant the same thing. And that basically captures this entire book. It is constantly reminding you of how human all of these characters are. They are so perfectly imperfect. They are offensive and they are hilarious. So I really, really enjoyed this book a lot. I had actually never read a Steinbeck book before. I know for a fact that I was supposed to have read Of Mice and Men in high school, and I most certainly did not do that. I had a bad habit of that in school because I enjoyed reading. I really didn't enjoy being told what to read, so I was really hard-headed when it came to being assigned a book to read, because if I wasn't feeling it, I just couldn't make myself do it. I know that people really love Steinbeck, and now I see why, because this book is bleak, but it is really funny to me. There are 2 instances at the beginning of the story where people off themselves, and there's nothing funny about that, but the way that this book presents it in such a matter-of-fact way is really just meant to kind of paint the picture of how things just happen here and people just kind of get with the program. It really sets a weird vibe. Because at the beginning of the story, there's a grocery store clerk named Lee Chong who is a businessman. He's not out to just extend charity to people, but he is really generous in the sense that he allows people to rack up like a tab at his store, and he won't cut them off until it reaches some arbitrary amount that he determines. It's like, you've gone too far. And so in one of, I don't know if it's the first one or three chapters, there is this dude, this guy, this husband's father. He literally has 6 children. He walks into the grocery store and he talks to Lee, and he's like, I owe you a lot of money, right? And Lee won't let him buy anymore. He's racked up such a debt to the grocery store that he's finally like, I'm sorry, I can't loan you anything else. You really need to pay your tab off before I'm going to let you get anything else. And the guy strikes up a deal with him, and he basically says, well, across the street, I own this little storehouse, this little warehouse storage shed type of thing. And he basically says, if I sign the deed to that warehouse to you, can we just call it even? Lee actually agrees to it, and he writes up a paper, stamps it, paid in full. He says, done deal. They shake hands on it. And then the dude walks across the street, goes into that storehouse, and then he ends his own life. Really sad. But that's just to give you the backstory of how Lee Chong acquired this building, because it becomes very important soon. Cannery Row is this industrial little town where the economic epicenter of the town is this sardine cannery. Not everyone in the town works there, but a lot of people do, and they are in charge of all the dirty work, the catching, the cooking, the canning of the sardines. But it mentions how people that work in the offices, like the accountants and the managers, they don't live there. They live elsewhere. And you don't really hear anything about how they live or where they live. You just know that they drive into town, they clock in, they do their job, they go back to their presumably nicer houses. And I found it interesting that I was assuming, based on the information I gathered at first, that you would hear more about the work lives of the people that live there, but work is really not brought up very often at all. Money is, and booze is, but the cannery, you kind of get the idea of how things work, but you don't hear about people's work day, you don't hear about the people that work in the offices. They're just kind of an afterthought to give you the context that that is the engine that drives this community, but the actual life that is lived in the community, the cannery is an afterthought. You've got this industrial seaside town, and it describes some of the businesses. I've already told you about the grocery store, but it also mentions a brothel. On the left-hand boundary of this lot is a stern and stately whorehouse of Dora Flood, a decent, clean, honest, old-fashioned sporting house where a man can take a glass of beer among friends. This is no fly-by-night, cheap clip joint, but a sturdy, virtuous club built, maintained, and disciplined by Dora, who, madam and girl for 50 years, has through the exercise of special gifts of tact, honesty, charity, and a certain realism made herself respected by the intelligent, the learned, and the kind. And by the same token, she is hated by the twisted and lascivious sisterhood of married spinsters whose husbands respect the home but don't like it very much. This book is hilarious. Dora keeps an honest, one-price house, sells no hard liquor, and she permits no loud or vulgar talk in her house. Of her girls, some are fairly inactive due to age and infirmities, but Dora never puts them aside, although she says some of them don't turn 3 tricks a month, but they go right on eating 3 meals a day. She's a pretty cool person. She's very, very generous, much like Lee Chong is, but she does have limits to her generosity. And It's funny how, honestly, the Bear Flag is the name of the brothel. The Bear Flag is kind of like a nun convent if it was also a brothel. Because they kind of just like live there and take care of one another. And there's all these rooms, these like apartment type of rooms in the building. And there's lots of women that live there and help take care of one another. And not all of them are like working women. And then another character you have is Doc. He is described as this really charismatic, also generous guy who runs a laboratory. And he has like oddities, and he collects different sea life and creatures that he then, I think, sells to medical institutions so that they can teach students how to like dissect things. So he basically makes his money by collecting all of these different species of things and collecting orders that he sends out to people. And so, from what I understand, he's like maybe the most well off person in Cannery Row, because he's always having women over to his house and listening to different music and enjoying different types of nice drinks and foods, and he will throw a party from time to time, and he'll help out just about anyone who asks because he's kind of friends with everybody, and everyone in the community thinks really highly of him. And even though he's not a medical doctor, everyone kind of treats him as such, and even though he doesn't quite know what he's doing, he has some of the resources to kind of fill that role. So even though he's not literally a doctor, that's kind of the way people view him. And then there's this group of dudes, and it's not exactly clear the age of these people. They're just called Mac and the Boys. And Mac and the Boys, I was thinking about this earlier today, they kind of remind me of the boys from Ed, Edd n Eddy, where they're kind of just always hanging out and coming up with a scheme to get jawbreakers. Mac and the Boys are always kind of scheming how they can get together some cash to get some booze. Or if they can just get straight to the booze and not even worry about the cash, that's probably even better in their book. And sometimes they have jobs, sometimes they don't. Sometimes a couple of the guys will go work some shifts at the cannery just long enough to get a little bit of cash, but then they'll quit. They're kind of just in and out as needed, but they don't remain consistently gainfully employed. And the storehouse that I mentioned that Lee Chong owns, Matt comes into the grocery store one day and he gets to talking to Lee. And he's like, "So, you've got that warehouse across the street, right? You worried anyone's gonna vandalize it? You worried anyone's gonna set fire to it?" Implying that, not that he would vandalize or burn down the building, but wouldn't it be a shame if someone were to do that to it? And so Lee is like, "Well, you can't stay there for free, but I could rent it to you, and you guys can stay there if you want." And they kind of strike up this pseudo deal where they say, okay, like, it's like $5 a week, $5 a month. I don't remember what random number that Lee tosses out there. But Lee knows the likelihood of them actually staying true to paying the rent is slim to none. But he realizes that there is some kind of benefit to allowing them to stay there because they're not wrong. If he's going to own it and he wants to basically hold on to it for its property value, he may as well just let them stay there. And they're also regular customers of his at the grocery, so as he sees it, if I let them stay there, even if they don't pay me rent, they're less likely to steal from my store because I'm allowing them to live there and not pay me rent. So it's kind of a smart move. And it is this interesting thing where Lee is really generous, but whenever he extends his generosity, there's almost always still a benefit to the deal for him. And that's kind of how we set the stage for where Mac and the Boys post up at. So they affectionately nickname the storehouse, it's called the Palace Flophouse, or they just call it the Flophouse. And I can't even remember if Mac and the boys is like Mac and three other guys. I think it is. One of them is named Hazel and Eddie, and there's one more that I can't recall. But they end up kind of just moving in and slowly sprucing the place up a little bit. It's got a dirt floor. It's like bare bones, but it's like a roof over their head. And before I'm pretty sure they had been sleeping in like tunnels or under trees. So this was a pretty big upgrade for them. And for as dry but lighthearted as this book can be, it has these moments of intensity that feel like it's funny because it's contrasting how frivolous some of the goings on are to how intense some of the narrators like pontifications are about the space. I don't really know. I'm struggling to put it into words, but maybe this will make more sense. The opening to chapter 2. The word is a symbol and a delight, which sucks up men and scenes, trees, plants, factories, and Pekingese. And then the thing becomes the word, and back to the thing again, but warped and woven into a fantastic pattern. The word sucks up Cannery Row, digests it, and spews it out, and the row has taken the shimmer of the green world and the sky-reflecting seas. I think what this is getting at is that, like, you're taking this mundane, everyday depiction of all of the, well, like in the introduction, the corrugated iron, the rust, the stink of the cannery, all of these things that probably would be off-putting qualities to the office workers of the cannery. These are the things that is taking the vision of Cannery Row and romanticizing it. And you get the introduction of Li Chong here. Li Chong is more than a Chinese grocer. He must be. Perhaps he is evil balanced and held, suspended by good. An Asiatic planet held to its orbit by the pull of Lao Tzu, and held away from Lao Tzu by the centrifugality of abacus and cash register. Li Chong suspended, spinning and whirling among groceries and ghosts. You can just take Li Chong to be the guy that owns the grocery store, or you can look at him as this nucleus, this centerpiece, this crucial pillar of the community. Because you later find out that there is another grocery store. You gotta walk up a big steep hill a couple miles away to get to it. And so you could go to another grocery store, but no one's gonna go to all the trouble, especially if you don't have a car. And most of the people, pretty much no one that lives on the row has a car of their own, except for a couple of people, like Doc. And I think Li Chong, he does have like an old busted truck that later gets fixed up for an adventure that somebody goes on. And fun fact about the busted truck that gets fixed later, there is this point where a fun fact is mentioned. I read a different book a while back, and I am not a car person, but someone who just knew facts about cars happens to mention that an old Model T, what would happen sometimes if you were driving a Model T, I think that maybe if the transmission got old and worn down, if you tried to approach a steep hill, the car wouldn't be able to go up it. But since you use reverse a lot less often, that the transmission is much stronger in the reverse gear. So people found out that if you wanted to go up a steep hill and your car couldn't do it, you could just turn the car around, put it in reverse, and it could go up the hill no problem. And that kind of blew my mind. And my jaw was on the floor when I got to the point in this book where they casually mentioned that happening. And I just found it hilarious that I was like, I already knew that. By some weird coincidence, I read that in some different book. And I don't know if that's just like common knowledge to car people, but that kind of blew my mind a little bit. And I don't know that I've read stories or books before that take a bunch of vignettes and string them together. This was a new format for me, because you'll randomly have like a short little chapter that mentions some random side character that never gets brought up again, and the only reason that they're brought up is just to paint you a larger picture of this community of people. And occasionally, like, even though most of the book is kind of set in reality and nothing super fantastical happens, you'll have this one vignette where, like, something insane and esoteric happens, and there were just some moments where it, like, really caught me off guard, and it was just super interesting. So I'm not gonna spoil, like, I'm trying to just touch on little things that, like, wouldn't ruin it for you if you've not read the book, but to give you just enough of a taste of it. I don't know if I'm accomplishing that, but that is my intention. And I'm trying to refresh my memory as I go along, because it's hard to recall information that isn't happening in like a chronological order. If there is a plot to this book, it has to do with the relationship between Doc and Mac specifically. Because one of the generous things that Doc does for the community is some of these people who, like, don't have regular employment, if they find themselves looking for an opportunity to make a bit of money, he can have them tag along with him to go retrieve some sea creatures or something, have a helping hand to load some stuff up into the truck, and then he'll pay them a little bit for it. So he spends a lot of time with Mac, because sometimes Mac has helped him with jobs or whatever, and sometimes Mac will just come ask him to borrow some money. And so Doc is fully aware of the best qualities of Mac and his personal limitations. Mac has such good intentions, but somehow every time that he tries to act on his good intentions, he is reminded and kind of embarrassed and ashamed of how he just kind of manages to twist it in a selfish light. And you can tell it really tears him up inside, because the sentiment that keeps coming up is that Mac will be hanging out with the boys, and they'll just think, Doc, what a guy. We ought to do something nice for him. And then they start scheming up. They want to throw him a party. And the ironic thing is, like, Doc tends to be the guy throwing the parties. He's the guy who has more resources to do that with. Mac and the boys literally live in a storage shed together. And so it's nice of them to want to throw him a party, but they realize that they don't have the money or the booze or the facilities to really pull it off. Which leads to this roundabout Ed, Edd and Eddy style scheme of them trying to save up some money to buy the supplies to throw Doc a party. The most ironic point of this being, they end up kind of asking Doc if there's any jobs that he needs done. And he says that he needs like 500 frogs for an order. And so Mac and the boys end up figuring out how to borrow a truck from Lee Chong to then go on this journey out of town to go try to gather up a bunch of frogs so that they can then give the frogs to Doc, get paid for the job, and then they plan to use the money from that job to throw a party for Doc. I'll leave it at that, but it really is due to the fact that Mac is well-intentioned but short-sighted and impulsive. But his charisma is off the charts. His character build is like almost all charisma and almost nothing else. Toward the end of the book, there is a party that ends up happening. Not the party that they intended to have, but there is a party. And something about the parties that these people throw, I don't know if you've seen the show Letterkenny, but there's always these sequences where Letterkenny has an incredible soundtrack. Like, sometimes you watch a show and the show's good, but the soundtrack is just not good. It's just like I'm watching Shameless right now. I'd never watched that show before. Really good show. The soundtrack sucks. It just like does not fit the quality of the show. But Letterkenny, that soundtrack rocks. And there's always these moments, and it doesn't happen every episode, but it definitely happens every season, where the group of people that live in Letterkenny will end up in like a bar brawl, like a group fight. And there will be this high octane music, and you'll just have a group of people just throwing haymakers, going in on each other. The men are fighting the men, the women are fighting the women, and then at the end of it all, they just end up kind of partying and having a good time together because they've kind of settled the score. That is almost exactly what happens at one of these parties. Is because they're a coastal town, they get a lot of, I guess, naval ships that come in, and you'll temporarily have these soldiers come into town, and they'll go to the bar and they'll visit the brothel, and then they'll go when the ship has to leave. And so they're having this party. Some of these soldiers show up, they pick a fight, they have a brawl, and then an hour or two passes, and then the soldiers come back and they join the party because they've settled the score and they're ready to party together. It is really funny that that's kind of the way things work in this town. It's like you get pissed off, you have a row about it, and then you just forgive and forget, basically. I'm certain that after I stop recording, there will be something that I remember that I forget to bring up, because the nature of this book not having a consistent plot throughout makes it hard to recall everything that happens, because it's like I'll have flashes of things. Like the memory that I have of reading it is flashes and vignettes, so it is hard to recall the chronological order of things that happen. So I'm just going to say I really, really, really like this book. I give it a very charming out of 10. Like I said, this was my accidental introduction to Steinbeck, and it inspired me so much that I went and bought the book that I'm reading currently and have yet to finish, The Winter of Our Discontent. I don't know how I went about choosing this book to read. I'll show you. There's my bookmark. I'm almost to the end of it. Almost to the end. And I really, really like this book. And this is not vignette based. This isn't short stories. This is actually one beginning to end novel. So I do plan to make a video about this when I have finished it and digested it. In fact, I might finish this in the next 2 or 3 days. But I don't really know what else to say about it, other than I really liked it. And I mean, I would recommend that you read it. I fear that I don't really know what else to say other than I really liked it. And I went ahead and bought, I only buy used copies of books. Like, I really enjoy having the physical copies of the books, but it's not financially feasible to just buy a new copy of every book. So I usually just get on Thrift Books or eBay or something, and I find a used copy, because I beat up my books. I'm not precious with them. It makes me kind of feel better when they're used because they're cheaper and they're already kind of beat up, so I'm totally cool with it. I'm not worried about keeping a book pristine. I'll dog-ear the pages, I'll mark it up, highlight it, fold it. I think it gives it character. I know some people are really weird about it, but the more, there's a stain on the corner, all these things that add character to it, that's this is my copy of the book now. But yeah, I don't know if I could use a Kindle. It just wouldn't feel as satisfying as it feels to sit and to flip through the pages. And this copy of Winter, it smells so good. And I don't know, sometimes you'll get one and it'll have a stamp where it used to belong to a library. This is clearly old, but it doesn't have any stamps in it. So it makes me wonder where it lived for all those years before I ended up with it. I'm definitely not a speed reader, but yeah, I kind of just do it at my own pace, and it's fun to document these as I read them. But yeah, I'll totally make a video. I'll totally make a video about The Winter of Our Discontent once I finished it. I'm not gonna say anything about it now, but yeah, I don't really have anything else to say. Good night.